On July 15th, 1981, a 13-year-old girl named Mary Louise Day vanished from her family's home in Seaside, California. No note, no suitcase, no neighbor saw her leave. She was just gone. Now, think about that for just a second. If your daughter disappeared, literally wasn't in her room one morning, you'd be frantic, right? Calling the police, asking neighbors, pacing the floor, trying to figure out if she ran away or if someone came into your house in the middle of the night and took her. But that didn't happen here. Mary's parents didn't report her missing. Not the day she vanished, not the next week, not ever. For them, it was just another day. And Mary, she wasn't mentioned again. For more than 20 years, the story of what happened to Mary Louise Day just stopped. But here's where the story takes a turn. Because in 2003, police in Phoenix, Arizona pull over a truck. It's a routine traffic stop. There's nothing extraordinary about it. Until a woman hands over an Arizona state ID. And the name on this ID is Mary Louise Day. Same name. Could it really be her? Could this possibly be Mary? Welcome to Beach House 34. I'm your host, Christine. Tonight, we're digging into one of the strangest stories you'll ever hear. It's one of those stories where the deeper you go, the stranger it gets. Before we get into today's episode, I want to let you know that you can get uncensored versions of this podcast along with early access by becoming a Patreon member. If you enjoy the podcast, please check it out at patreon.com/beachhouse34. Mary Louise Day was born on February 19th, 1968 in Little Falls, New York. Her parents were Charlotte Pressler and Charles Day. But that's not where this story begins, and it's certainly not where it ends up. Because when Mary was born, Charlotte was already married to someone else, not Charles. So she left that first husband and married Charles Day. Together, they had a second daughter, Kathy, in 1969. But the marriage, like the first one that Charlotte had, didn't last. While Charlotte was still married to Charles, she began another affair, this time with a man named Ira. That relationship led to the birth of her third daughter, Sherrie, in 1971. Now, Charlotte was still legally married to Charles Day at the time. Whether he knew the baby wasn't his, that's unclear. But then came along William, a much younger man in the military. Charlotte left Charles for him. She married again for the third time. By the mid-1970s, Charlotte had 3 daughters, Mary, Kathy, and Sherrie. The first 2, Mary and Kathy, shared a father. The third did not. And at every turn, the family story just bent a little bit more out of shape. Charlotte struggled. The girls were in and out of foster care. Their instability was relentless. But at one point, a foster family did step in, and thankfully, they kept all of the 3 girls together. That would be one of the only moments of stability that these sisters ever had. Then, in 1975, and for reasons that remain baffling to this day, Charlotte regained custody of Mary and Kathy and Sherrie. However, Sherrie ended up being left behind, still in foster care. Now, why did this happen? Well, in a later interview, Sherrie, who was just 6 years old at the time, remembers this moment very well. She says that she was furious. She didn't want to go with her mom. And as she sat on her mom's lap in the front seat of the car, she wet herself. Out of spite? Out of fear? Maybe both. Charlotte's reaction? She turned the car around, drove back to the foster home, walked to the door, and handed Sherrie over. "Here," she said, "this one's yours." That's how the separation happened. No legal process, no formal custody dispute, just a declaration, a literal handoff. And from that moment forward, the three sisters would live three very different lives. With William serving in the military, the family moved frequently. In 1978, they were transferred to Hawaii. But before they left New York, Charlotte then gave birth to another daughter, Billie Jean. Then, while in Hawaii, she had a son. These two children were presumably William's, though given Charlotte's history of overlapping relationships, that assumption isn't exactly ironclad. While the family was living in Hawaii, Mary and Kathy's biological father, Charles Day, died. He left behind an inheritance for his daughters, money that they wouldn't be able to access until they turned 18. The two sisters, they had a code word for this inheritance, and they called it Mohawk. It was their shorthand for the escape plan that they hoped to use when they were old enough to claim that money and leave. Around the end of 1980, Child Protective Services removed Mary from the household. It had been discovered that her stepfather, William, had been physically abusing her. Mary was then placed into protective custody. Now, soon after this, the family moved again, this time to Seaside, California. But they did so without Mary. She remained in Hawaii for a time, separated from the rest of the family. It wasn't until several months later that she was sent to rejoin them in California. Once in Seaside, according to Charlotte, Mary often ran away from home. Now, law enforcement, she said, would always find her and bring her back. But that version of events comes solely from Charlotte. There are no records to confirm any of it. No police reports, no paperwork. In July of 1981, about 6 months after Mary had been returned to her family, she disappeared. Now, at the time, the family was living in Seaside, California. In the house were Mary, her younger sister, Kathy, and their two half-siblings, children of Charlotte and William. Mary was around 13 and Kathy was around 12. One night, Charlotte and William left the house and they took the younger kids with them. Mary and Kathy stayed behind to watch the family dog. Now, at some point, while the adults were gone, the dog became violently ill, so sick that according to Kathy, it appeared to be on the verge of death. Now, the girls were left home to care for the dog, alone, 12 and 13 years old, which also raises the question, was the dog already sick before the family left? Is that why they had the girls stay there? Or did something happen after they were gone? When the family returned and found the dog in distress, William immediately accused Mary of poisoning it. Mary pushed back and the argument escalated. Charlotte then told Kathy to go to her room and shut the door. Now, Kathy, she did say she went to her room, but she left the door open. And from that doorway, she says that she saw William attack Mary. She remembers him hitting Mary in the throat, and she remembers seeing blood come from Mary's mouth. The next morning, Mary was gone. When Kathy asked, she was told that Mary had run away. She was also told not to ask questions and not to speak her sister's name again. There was another change too. The children, who usually had free rein to play in the backyard, were suddenly warned to stay away from one particular corner of the yard. It was totally off limits. No explanation, just stay out. No police report was filed, no missing persons bulletin. There were no flyers, no neighborhood canvassing, no school inquiry because Mary had never been enrolled in school in California. There was no official record of her presence in the state at all. As far as the public knew, Mary Day had simply vanished. But not according to the federal government, because Mary's biological father had passed away and left the girls this inheritance. She had also started to receive Social Security benefits. And those checks, they kept coming. And someone in the household kept cashing them. Not long after Mary disappeared, the family moved again, this time into base housing at Fort Ord. They didn't stay there very long. Before the year was out, they had relocated again, this time to the East Coast, New York. Now, Sherrie, the younger sister, the one who had been left behind in foster care, she had never stopped thinking about her siblings. Now, by this time, she had been officially adopted by the family that took her in, but she hadn't forgotten where she came from. And then all of a sudden one day, Sherrie gets a letter from Kathy. The return address said that they were now living in New York, and it wasn't far from where Sherrie was. This was 1983, 2 years after Mary had vanished. So Sherrie's adoptive, now actual parents, offered to drive her up to visit. And they did. When Sherrie got there, Mary was gone. Charlotte, Sherrie's bio mom, had told her that Mary had run away, that they didn't know where she was, and Sherrie believed her. Charlotte even claimed that they had reported Mary missing, that the police had been involved, that they'd done everything that they could to find her. None of that was true. So Sherrie then asked for a picture of Mary, something to remember her by, and Charlotte told her that there weren't any, because she had burned them all. Not long after this visit, Kathy, who was just now 14 at the time, was kicked out of the house, forced to survive on her own. There are people who struggle with parenting. And then there are people like Charlotte, people who walk away from their children, lie about it, and then set fire to the evidence. Some people simply should not be parents. Years went by. No word, no sign of Mary Louise Day. But Sherrie, Mary's younger sister, never stopped thinking about her. When Sherrie turned 18, she began to speak again with her biological mother, Charlotte, not just casually, but deliberately. She asked questions. She wrote down answers. She kept notes just in case she ever needed a record. And for decades, these notes were all that she had. There were no breakthroughs, no leads, or no explanations. Until 2002. That year, Sherrie filed an official missing person report. She told police what she knew, or rather what little she'd been able to piece together. And for the first time, authorities formally opened an investigation into Mary Day's disappearance. Sherrie gave them her notes, and among them was a chilling detail. At one point, Charlotte had told Sherrie that she knew of places in California, specific places, where you could bury a body and it would never be found. That was enough to catch law enforcement's attention. But, the case was cold, 2 decades old. Any physical evidence that might have existed was likely long gone. Still, investigators started to put the pieces together. They confirmed that Mary had disappeared while the family was living in Seaside, California. And then came something even more troubling. Mary's Social Security number had never been used. There were no records of her applying for a driver's license, no ID, no employment history, no medical records, nothing. As far as official systems were concerned, Mary had vanished in 1981 and never reappeared. Kathy, Mary's sister, was interviewed as well, and she confirmed what she remembered. The night she and Mary stayed home with the family dog. And the brutal beating she says that she witnessed. Kathy even returned to the Seaside house with investigators. In the backyard, she pointed to a specific spot, the one that William had warned them to avoid after Mary had disappeared. So at that point, the working theory was pretty straightforward and grim, right? That Mary had died that night, that William, or possibly William and Charlotte together, had buried her in that backyard. A team of cadaver dogs was brought in. There were 4 in total. Each one was deployed independently, and each dog alerted to the same spot near a tree. This was enough for police to dig. They uncovered a teddy bear, then a belt buckle, then a small canvas shoe. But no body, no remains, just those 3 items. That shoe, though, it raised questions. It was a Keds sneaker, the kind with a canvas top and a rubber sole. Pretty common at the time, but what stood out wasn't the brand, it was the size. It looked far too small to have belonged to a 13-year-old girl. So the question then becomes, whose shoe was it? And if it wasn't Mary's, then what exactly were they digging up? By this point in the investigation, police had tracked Charlotte and William to Kansas. They obtained a search warrant and they questioned Charlotte. She told investigators that William had filed a missing persons report for Mary in Salinas, California. Now, Salinas isn't far from Seaside. It's roughly about 15 miles. But it raises a question. If Mary went missing from Seaside, why report it in a different jurisdiction? Then Charlotte's story shifted. She said that they hadn't filed a report after all. They'd just bought Mary a bus ticket to Salinas. So now the story is they handed a 13-year-old girl a one-way ticket and sent her off to live her life? That's the claim. And while it might sound implausible, let's not forget this is the same household that kicked Kathy out at 14. So, unfortunately, it tracks. Then it was William's turn to talk. When police asked him about the dog, he initially said that he didn't remember anything. But when they pressed, his memory got a little better. He said that Mary had poisoned the dog. He said he got angry, very angry, and admitted that he might have struck her in the throat, but then claimed that he couldn't recall exactly because he had blacked out. According to investigators, William told them that the next morning, Charlotte was talking to William and said that it looked like he'd had a demon in him that night. Now, William insisted that he didn't kill Mary, but when asked if the demon inside of him, the one that Charlotte claimed to have seen, could have done it, he said yes. Now, that sounds like a confession or something very close to it. But without a body, without physical evidence tying him directly to a death, police let him go. And then something completely unexpected. In 2003, a traffic stop in Phoenix, Arizona, police pull over this truck that has stolen plates. Everyone inside this truck is asked for identification. One of the passengers hands over her ID card, an Arizona state ID, and the name on it is Mary Louise Day. Same name, same spelling as the girl who vanished in 1981, roughly the same birth date. It could have been a coincidence, a long shot. Maybe it was just somebody with the same name. But remember, investigators had already run every trace that they could. Social Security, driver's license, state ID. There was nothing. No evidence that Mary Day existed past 1981. And now here was this woman, Mary Louise Day, alive or claiming to be, and sitting in a truck with stolen license plates. They brought her to the station. The woman claiming to be Mary Louise Day was now in police custody, and investigators on the case flew out to Arizona to speak with her in person. Now, on paper, she matched. Her age lined up. She said that she remembered leaving Seaside, California. She claimed she had run away to escape Charlotte and William. And according to her, she made her way to Modesto, bounced around a few other towns, and eventually settled in Arizona. But from the start, there were inconsistencies. This Mary spoke with a incredibly strong Southern dialect. It's not something that you'd expect from someone who had spent their childhood in New York or California, and not something that was easily explained either. Then there was the ID. It had just been issued 3 weeks earlier, right around the time that the police investigation into Mary's disappearance was reopened. That timing raised red flags. And when they pressed her on the details, on the parts of this story that mattered, she didn't remember much. She didn't remember the dog. She didn't remember the beating. She didn't remember the things that her sisters remembered vividly, the things that had haunted them for years. So this raised an even bigger question. Was this really Mary Day? Or was this someone pretending to be her? Someone who had read about the case, found the name, maybe even believed that she could slip into the identity of a girl who'd been missing for 2 decades. And there was only one way to know for sure: DNA. And she agreed to provide a sample, had no hesitation about that. The problem was that Mary's biological father, Charles Day, had died years earlier, and his remains had been cremated, so they couldn't test him directly. But they could test against Charlotte and against one of Mary's sisters. This would at least confirm whether this woman was Charlotte's biological daughter. And when the results came back, the answer was shockingly clear. Yes, she was Charlotte's daughter. When Sherrie got the call about this, she was stunned. Excited, yeah, but stunned. After more than 2 decades of silence, of not knowing, someone was saying that they had found Mary alive, living in Arizona. And not just living, she was coming to visit. Mary Day, the sister that Sherrie had feared was dead, was flying in. But when Sherrie met her at the airport, something didn't feel right. This woman, the one walking toward her, didn't look like Mary. She didn't act like her either. She didn't even recognize Sherrie at first. Still, Sherrie opened her home. She let her in. She wanted to believe that this was her sister. But the questions started almost immediately. Mary couldn't remember her own birthday. She couldn't recall her father's name. She still spoke in that deep Southern accent, one that made no sense for someone who'd spent her formative years in New York and California. She gave no clear account of where she'd been or what had happened to her after 1981. And one particular moment stood out. Remember, Mary and Kathy had once shared this secret code word, Mohawk, a reference to that inheritance money left behind by their father. It had been their plan, their signal, the way out of where they were. This Mary didn't remember the word. She didn't even understand the reference. Then something even stranger. A mail started arriving for Mary at Sherrie's home. But it wasn't addressed to Mary Day. It was addressed to Monica Deveraux. Coincidentally, same initials, right? And the last name Deveraux would lead you to believe that this Mary had grown up maybe somewhere in the South. But the oddities didn't stop there. Sherrie began to notice dramatic shifts in behavior. One day, Mary would be cheerful, she'd be chatty. She still had that Southern drawl. But the next, she'd be sullen and angry and visibly different. Even her posture would change. Her walk would turn into a slow, heavy shuffle. She didn't just act like someone else. She moved like someone else. Sherrie would ask the same questions again and again, only to receive different answers every time. Mary told these long, rambling stories that didn't add up. They didn't go anywhere. And just when the case seemed like it couldn't get any more complicated, it did. In 2008, Cadaver dogs were conducting a search on the old Fort Ord military base, and it was for an unrelated case. But what happened is that the dogs hit on a house, and not just any house. It turned out to be the same one that Charlotte and William had lived in after leaving Seaside. The same couple who had said that Mary had ran away. The same couple who never filed a police report. So, what were cadaver dogs picking up in a place tied to the very people that Mary had vanished from? That's where the questions start all over again. And here's something else, something that didn't sit right with the investigators on this case. According to reporting from the Investigation Discovery documentary, when the woman claiming to be Mary Day presented her Arizona ID, the birth date on it wasn't February 19th, 1968, the date on record for Mary Louise Day. It was December 21st, 1966. Now, was this just a clerical error? Was it a fake ID? Or was it something else? Because this leads to a question that's kind of been lurking beneath the surface of this case for years. Is it possible that Charlotte had more children than she ever admitted to? Her history certainly doesn't rule it out. Multiple marriages, affairs that overlapped, children fathered by different men. There's speculation that Charlotte may have had children even before Mary, children that no one in the family ever knew about. So was this woman really Mary Day, or just another daughter that Charlotte never acknowledged? What is clear is that before this woman with the Arizona ID surfaced, Charlotte and William, they were under some serious scrutiny. Prosecutors were close to filing charges. There was no body, but there were 2 separate hits from cadaver dogs at 2 homes now that the couple had lived in. That's not nothing. That's not coincidence. The working theory at the time was homicide, and the case was building, even without a body. And then suddenly, a woman with Charlotte's DNA shows up, claiming to be Mary. Some have speculated, and they still do, that Charlotte, facing a possible murder charge, might have reached out to another daughter, maybe one born during one of her earlier affairs, maybe someone she'd kept at a distance, and asked her to pose as Mary. Far-fetched? Maybe. But desperate people make desperate choices. So quite a few years go by, and in 2017, Sherrie, the youngest of the Day sisters, got word that Mary was alive and living in Missouri. But not just alive, she was dying. Mary was in hospice care, battling late-stage cancer. She had spent most of her life trying to find out what had happened to her sister, and now with Mary on what could be and was likely going to be her deathbed, Sherrie hoped that there might finally be a moment of clarity. People say that the end of life brings truth, that it compels confession, that maybe if something had been hidden, there'd be a chance in those last days for Mary to say it out loud. And Mary did agree to speak with her. But she still didn't recall the beating. She said she remembered leaving Seaside. She remembered being taken in by an older woman, but the rest was hazy, and she couldn't explain what happened in the days after she left the house, or if she'd ever really left of her own free will. A few days later, Mary died. But Sherrie wasn't done. She followed up on that one detail that Mary had given her, the name of that older woman who had taken her in. Sherrie tracked her down, and from this family, she obtained a photo. It was of a younger Mary and dated after 1981. For Sherrie, that was enough. This picture was the missing piece. She believed it, that this woman, the one who had shown up in Arizona with Mary Day's name, was her sister. With that, she made one last move, and she went to confront Charlotte, her biological mother. Charlotte was now in a nursing home in her late 70s. They did speak, but Charlotte revealed nothing new. No explanations, no acknowledgement, no remorse. According to Sherrie, Charlotte offered nothing, not even the smallest gesture of responsibility. And even with the photo in hand, doubts persisted among the other sisters, among investigators. The central question was this woman who was in hospice care in Missouri and found in Arizona really Mary Day? This still hovered over every piece of the case. Because here's the thing, some of them still believe that Mary died in 1981, that she was killed likely by William, that she was buried in the backyard in Seaside, and that when the family moved to Fort Ord, they took her with them. That theory doesn't explain everything, though. Like the shoe that was found during the dig, a small canvas Keds sneaker. It was unusually small for a 13-year-old, and the presence of a teddy bear nearby, that's more in line with a much younger child. So who did these items belong to? The fact is, we don't know. Whether the woman who died in Missouri was truly Mary Louise Day or another daughter sent in to pose as her is a question that may never be answered. No one has confessed to what happened in July of 1981. No new evidence has emerged to contradict the last DNA test. And as for William, Mary's stepfather, he continues to deny any wrongdoing. What we do know is this: Mary's sisters loved her. They never stopped wondering, worrying, or searching. Sherrie, especially, made it her life's mission to find the truth. And now, decades later, there's one thing that remains, and that's the silence and still the unknown. Thank you. Thank you all for listening. I appreciate each and every one of you. If you want more cases like this, hit like and subscribe. I post new episodes weekly. We'll talk again real soon, everyone. Bye for now.